Earlier I spoke to the ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr, began by asking him, well, why was he pursuing this change?
I think it's really about harm minimisation, Tom. We're particularly focused on keeping people out of our criminal justice system and the possession or cultivation of very, very small amounts of cannabis really should best be dealt with as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
And in terms of where you sit, could we possibly see other drugs following suit in a similar vein for the ACT?
Look, I don't think so. I think this is specifically focused on cannabis. We'll review the implementation of this change after 3 years and remain focused on that at this point in time.
So you say at this point in time, but when you review that in 3 years, if it's seen as working, in your own words, it's just about reducing harm, encouraging people as well to seek help without fear of arrest. If that could work for other drugs, why would that not be considered?
Well, that could be considered at that point in time, but we would evaluate how this process has worked. We've also got evaluations of our pill testing trials as well to consider. So it's quite a full agenda in relation to law reform within the ACT at the moment. So I think we'll focus on these two issues specifically.
Right, and that's fair enough, but that would be something, if you're going about this from a health point of view, that in 3 years' time, if it is seen to be working well, then you would consider expanding it.
Well, yes, we'll look particularly, as I say, at the effectiveness of our pill testing trials at major music festivals, and we'll look at this particular approach on cannabis law reform. We have inbuilt into the legislation that passed yesterday a review to commence after 3 years. I imagine that will take 6 to 12 months, so sometime in the mid-2020s it would be appropriate to review the situation. I would note, of course, that in relation to cannabis, for example, the ACT Parliament in the 1990s introduced the simple cannabis offence notice system, so effectively a fine-based system for small amounts of cannabis for personal use. So it was around 25 years between that process and where we are now. So things evolve. It's an evolution rather than a revolution on this matter. And so it would be appropriate in about 5 years' time to have a look at this issue more broadly. Presumably there'll be more information and evidence from other Australian jurisdictions and other places around the world. But I think at this point in time it's appropriate just to focus on this reform and the other areas that we have highlighted. There's a lot of other things on our agenda, and so as far as drug law reform goes, this is our priority at this point in time.
As for this reform, interesting reaction from the federal government. The Attorney-General, Christian Porter, appeared to say they wouldn't be pursuing anything to contravene it, but Peter Dutton seemed to indicate that could be the case. What's your information on the federal government's approach?
Well, look, I've seen both comments reported in the media. I think the Commonwealth DPP made pretty clear in their advice to the ACT government in relation to the Commonwealth Criminal Code, particularly sections 308 and 313, that provide for state and territory diversionary systems, alternate sentencing options, and a defence, a legal defence against a charge brought under Commonwealth law. I guess you go to a very simple question of, should the Commonwealth DPP's time be spent prosecuting individuals in the ACT for small amounts of cannabis possession, or should they be focused on issues of national significance? And I think if you ask the average person in the street, the old pub test, most people would think that the Commonwealth DPP and the Commonwealth Government should really be focused on national and international issues, and they've got better things to worry about than the level of sanction on possession and cultivation of less than 50 grams of cannabis here in the ACT.
Yet the ACT Police have said providing someone with cannabis is still an offence, even without money changing hands. So does it sit right that there's still no way of actually obtaining cannabis legally, even though people can have it and use it?
Look, I think it's really a question of what's appropriate in terms of the criminal justice system, where police resources should be targeted, and what our focus is in terms of both harm minimisation and better health outcomes and public health outcomes across an entire population. So we've reached the conclusion that the Nancy Reagan approach of just saying no, that sort of dominated public policy in the 70s and 80s and still hangs over in certain areas. Prohibition hasn't really worked. And so we need to try some different approaches. The ACT started this in the 1990s with the simple cannabis offence notice schemes. This is a further evolution of that. So, look, I think it's people should just take a calm and more measured reaction to what's occurring here in the ACT. I think it's just a further step along an evidence-based track.
What's your message on cannabis use? For a lot of people, it's probably seen quite innocently. Maybe they had an experience at university and it led to thinking things were a lot funnier than they were and too many packets of burger rings. For others, serious lifelong drug use and psychosis.
Yes, for some people, cannabis use can have quite significant health implications. And I would encourage those people to seek medical assistance. I want those people to be assisted if they have an addiction. I don't want to see them in jail. I don't think that a criminal justice path is the best way for those individuals to overcome addiction. For most people, they'll never need to use or want to try cannabis. We've seen over the last 2 decades in the ACT, in terms of self-identified use of cannabis, the percentage of Canberrans who self-identify as using it has in fact dropped as our reforms and our harm minimisation approach has been applied. So I think the evidence, certainly within the ACT, is that most people don't use cannabis, most people never will. For those who do, who might have an addiction, then we want a health outcome and a health intervention for them, not a legal intervention. And we don't want to fill our jails with low-level recreation drug users.
All right, ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.